Clara Bennett did not walk out of that mansion. She ran. In the dead of night, with one hand pressed against a bleeding cut above her ear and the other clutching a crumpled letter she had read 100 times, she ran down the servants' path, through the iron gate, and into the dark Virginia road, without looking back once. Not because she was brave, because staying meant dying slowly, and she had already decided she would rather die free. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Let's begin. The letter was dated 6 weeks earlier. Clara had found it tucked inside a copy of a Denver newspaper that one of the kitchen maids had left near the back staircase, the only place in the Whitmore estate where Richard's eyes never quite reached. She had not been permitted to receive mail. She had not been permitted to read newspapers. But the maid old Margaret had a habit of leaving things where Clara might find them, and never once admitting she'd done it on purpose. Clara had read the letter 3 times before she understood what it was. Honest and decent man. Cattle rancher, Silver Creek, Colorado Territory, seeking a wife, not for beauty or status, but for companionship and mutual respect. Any woman of good character willing to start a new life is welcome to write. N. Cole. She had held that piece of paper so long that the ink smudged at the corners, where her fingers kept pressing down, as if by holding it hard enough she could make it more real. A stranger in Colorado. A man she had never seen, never spoken to someone whose face she could not picture if she tried. And yet that single paragraph, companionship and mutual respect, had done something to her that nothing had done in 3 years. It had made her feel like a person again. She wrote back the same night, crouched over the writing desk in the corner of the bedroom while Richard slept. She kept the candle low. She kept her handwriting small. She told Nathan Cole only what was necessary, that she was a woman in Virginia, that she was serious about leaving her current life, that she did not have much, but she would work hard, and she would be honest. She did not tell him about the bruises. She did not tell him about the locked study, or the nights she spent sitting on the floor, because she was too afraid to get into the bed. She only said that she needed a fresh start, and that if he was still looking, she would like to come. She mailed it through Margaret. She did not know if he would answer. He did. "Come when you're ready, ma'am. I'll be at the station." 4 words. And somehow those 4 words were the most dignified thing anyone had said to her in years. She left on a Tuesday in late March when Richard was away in Richmond for a business meeting that would keep him occupied for 3 days. She had planned every detail for 2 weeks. She took only what fit in a single carpet bag: 2 dresses, a warm shawl, her mother's necklace that she had kept hidden in the lining of her winter coat, and the letter from Nathan Cole folded into a small square inside her glove. She left nothing in that house that she would mourn. She had already mourned everything she lost inside those walls while she was still living there. She walked out through the back garden at 4 in the morning. The iron gate creaked when she pulled it open, and for one horrible second she froze, certain that somehow Richard had come home early, that he was standing in the upstairs window watching her, that she would hear his footsteps on the gravel. But there was nothing. Only the sound of her own breathing and the distant bark of a dog somewhere down the road. She walked 2 miles to the train station. She did not take a carriage. She did not ask for help. She kept her head down and her grip tight on the carpet bag, and she did not stop moving until she was standing at the ticket window, pressing every dollar she had managed to quietly collect over 6 months across the counter. "Westbound," she said. "As far as this gets me toward Colorado." The man behind the counter looked at her for a moment. Her disheveled hair, the faint shadow of a bruise along her jaw that her coat collar didn't quite cover, the way her hands were shaking, even though her voice was steady. He slid the ticket across without a word, and that small act of quiet decency nearly broke her. She sat in the last car of the train, the one farthest from the platform, and she stared out the window as Virginia began moving away from her. The grand houses and manicured lawns and gas-lit streets fading back into dark countryside, and she pressed her forehead against the cold glass and let herself breathe for the first time in what felt like years. She was terrified. She was also underneath the terror. Something else. Something she couldn't name right away. Something unfamiliar and raw and quietly fierce. She was free. The train ride was 3 days and 2 nights with stops in towns whose names Clara barely registered. She slept in short, uneasy stretches, always waking suddenly with her hand pressed flat against the seat beside her, bracing for something that wasn't there. It took her most of the first day to stop flinching every time the train car door opened. By the second day, she had started watching the landscape change outside the window. The green rolling hills of Virginia gave way to flatter land, then to wider skies, then to something that didn't have a word she knew, a kind of enormous, unhurried space that seemed to push the horizon back further every hour. The air looked different through the glass. The light was different. By the time she reached the edge of the Colorado Territory, the world outside looked nothing like the world she had come from. And she gripped her mother's necklace through the fabric of her coat and told herself that was exactly the point. She arrived in Silver Creek on a Thursday afternoon. The platform was small, just a wooden structure with a tin roof and a hand-painted sign that had seen better years. There were maybe a dozen people milling around, rough-dressed, sun-weathered, moving with the practical ease of people who were used to a life that asked something of them every day. 2 cowboys in dusty hats were loading supply crates onto a wagon. A woman in a calico dress was arguing cheerfully with a man who appeared to be her husband about something involving a broken fence. 3 children were chasing each other around the station agent's booth while the station agent pretended not to notice. Clara stepped off the train and stood still. She had imagined this moment many times on the journey west. She had imagined herself composed, dignified, arriving with some fraction of the poise she'd been trained to display at Richard's dinner parties. What she had not imagined was how her legs would feel, uncertain, slightly unsteady, the way ground feels after a long time at sea. What she had not imagined was the wind dry and clean and carrying the smell of pine and dust, and something she couldn't identify, something wild and open, nothing like Virginia. She stood on that platform with her carpet bag at her feet and her mother's necklace pressing against her collarbone through her blouse, and she looked around for a man she had never seen before, whose face she could not picture, who had written 4 words to a stranger and somehow changed the entire direction of her life. She almost missed him. He was not standing at the center of the platform or making himself visible. He was off to the side near one of the wooden support posts, leaning against it in that unhurried way some people have not. Restless, not performative, just present. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than she'd expected, with dark hair going a little gray at the temples, under a battered brown hat that he'd clearly owned a long time. His face was weathered and quiet, the face of a man who spent most of his days outdoors, and not many of them talking. He was watching her with a look that was careful and steady, like he was trying to give her time to notice him before he moved toward her. When their eyes met, he straightened away from the post. He walked over slowly without rushing her, and he stopped a respectful distance away, farther than he needed to, she noticed, farther than most men would have stood. He removed his hat. "Ma'am," he said. "Are you Mrs.? Are you Clara Bennett?" His voice was low and even, no performance in it. Just a plain question from a man who was asking it directly. "Yes," she said. Her own voice came out steadier than she expected. "I am." He nodded once, like that was settled. "Nathan Cole," he said. "I'm glad the train wasn't late. I've been told it sometimes is." She almost laughed. It was such an ordinary thing to say, and she hadn't heard an ordinary thing said to her in so long that it hit her like a small shock. "It wasn't," she said. "Not this time." He looked at her carpet bag. "Is that everything?" "Yes." He reached down and picked it up before she could protest, not grabbing it, not making a point of it, just picking it up the way you pick up something that needs to be carried when your hands are free and the other person's aren't. "My wagon's around front," he said. "The ride to the ranch is about 40 minutes, rough in parts." "I hope that's all right." "That's fine," she said. He put his hat back on and turned toward the front of the station, leaving space beside him for her to walk without crowding her. She followed him. And that was how it began, Not with a declaration, or a ceremony, or even a particularly remarkable conversation. Just a man picking up a bag, and a woman walking beside him through a dusty frontier town, both of them starting something they couldn't entirely name, yet both of them carrying things the other couldn't see. The wagon ride to the ranch was indeed rough in parts, the dirt road cutting across land that clearly had its own rules about direction and grade. Nathan drove without talking much, which Clara appreciated more than she could say. She had grown so accustomed to the exhausting performance of social conversation, the careful monitoring of every word, the reading of Richard's mood in the set of his shoulders before deciding what was safe to say, that ordinary silence felt like a gift. She watched the land instead. It was nothing like she'd imagined the West to be from the books Richard had allowed her to read, which were carefully selected and contained very little that might give her ideas. The land here was not dramatic in a showy way. It was vast and spare and indifferent to her in a way she found strangely comforting, like standing in front of something so large it didn't require anything of you, didn't judge you, didn't hold your history against you. After a while, Nathan said, "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to tell me." She turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, his hands easy on the reins. "I wrote back to you because you sounded honest," he said. "That's enough for me to start with. Whatever else there is, that's yours. You don't owe me the story." She stared at him for a moment. She was looking for the angle, waiting for the but, the condition, the thing he wanted in exchange for that generosity. It was a habit 3 years of Richard had burned into her, this constant scanning for the catch. She didn't find one. "Thank you," she said carefully. He nodded once, the same as before. A man of few gestures, but the ones he made meant something. They rode another 10 minutes before he said, "I should be honest with you about the ranch. It's not prosperous, not the way it could be. We had a hard winter, and I lost some cattle. The house is modest. I don't have help on the property, so it's work, and I won't pretend otherwise." "I'm not afraid of work," she said. "I didn't figure you were," he said. "Just wanted to be clear about what I was offering." "What are you offering?" she asked, and she hadn't meant it to come out quite like that, blunt and direct, the kind of question Richard would have called unbecoming, but Nathan didn't flinch. He considered it for a moment, like it was a fair question. "Honesty," he said. "A roof. A fair shake at a life. And a man who keeps his word." She looked down at her hands in her lap. "That's more than I've had in a while," she said quietly. He didn't say anything to that. He didn't try to fill the space with something easier, or redirect to a safer subject. He just let the words exist the way a man does, when he understands that some things don't need a response, they just need to be heard. The ranch house was small. Clara had lived in a 20-room estate with staff and a wine cellar and a parlor that cost more to furnish than most families saw in a decade. The Cole ranch house had 3 rooms, a stone fireplace that took up most of one wall, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove that had clearly been repaired more than once, and a back porch that looked out over an open field and a stand of cottonwood trees along a creek bed. It was the most honest-looking place she had ever been in. Nathan set her bag down inside the door and showed her where things were, with the efficiency of a man who was slightly more nervous than he was letting on. The way he kept touching the brim of his hat even when it didn't need adjusting, the way he spoke a little faster when he was explaining where the extra blankets were kept. She found that endearing in a way she couldn't quite explain, that he would be nervous, that this mattered to him enough to be nervous about. "The bedroom is yours," he said. "I'll take the other room. It's fine, I've slept in worse." "Nathan?" She stopped him. He turned. "I appreciate your kindness," she said. "I want you to know that. I don't take it lightly." He looked at her for a moment with that careful, steady regard. "You don't need to thank me for being decent," he said. "That's not something a person ought to need thanking for." She nodded. Her throat felt tight. She turned toward the window and looked out at the field until she was sure her face was composed again. The first weeks were hard in ways she hadn't anticipated, not because Nathan was difficult, He was the opposite of difficult. He was patient in a way that seemed entirely natural to him, not performed, not deliberate. He showed her how to manage the stove without making it sound like a lesson. He demonstrated how to read the cattle's behavior without any condescension in his voice. When she made mistakes, and she made them often, burning the first 3 meals she attempted, losing track of one of the younger heifers who'd gotten through a gap in the fence, accidentally letting the barn cat into the feed store, he never made her feel small. "Try again," he'd say, that was all. But the difficulty was inside her. She kept bracing for the shift, the moment when the patience ran out, when the mask came off, when she would do something wrong enough to reveal who Nathan Cole actually was beneath the quiet decency. She had been here before, or thought she had. Richard had been charming once. Richard had been kind in the beginning, or something that looked enough like kind that she hadn't known the difference. She had learned slowly and painfully that a man's behavior in the early days was not a promise about who he would become, so she watched. She noticed the way Nathan's jaw set when he was frustrated, not at her, but at broken equipment, or uncooperative weather, or the financial pressures he didn't talk about, but she could see in the way he added up columns in his ledger at night. She noticed the way he spoke to the ranch hands, who came through occasionally direct and fair, no cruelty in it. She noticed the way he handled the horses, not rough, not sentimental, just firm and honest, treating the animals like they were worth something. She was building a case. She understood that about herself. She was collecting evidence the way you do when you've been burned badly enough that your instincts no longer trust themselves. About 3 weeks in, she dropped a cast iron pan and it caught the edge of the stove wrong, and the noise was sudden and loud and metallic, and she spun around before she could stop herself, pressing her back to the counter with her hands up. The reflex was so deep, it happened before she could think. Nathan was in the doorway. He had come in from outside and must have heard the crash. He stood very still, taking in the scene, the pan on the floor. Clara with her back against the counter, and her hands raised, and her face the face of someone waiting for something bad. He did not move toward her. "It's all right," he said quietly. "Just the pan." She lowered her hands slowly. She could feel the blood in her face, and she hated. It hated that she'd revealed something she hadn't chosen to reveal. Hated that her own body had given her away. "I know," she said. Her voice was stiff. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," he said, still in that same quiet voice. "You didn't do anything wrong." He walked over and picked up the pan himself and set it back on the counter. He stood there for a moment, not looking at her, giving her time to collect herself without the pressure of being watched. Then he said simply, "I made coffee this morning. There's still some left if you want it." She swallowed. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." He poured her a cup and handed it over and went back out to the yard without asking any questions. She stood in that kitchen for a long moment with the warm cup between her palms. She thought, "I don't know what to do with a man like this." She thought, "That may be the most dangerous thing about him." Their marriage ceremony, such as it was, had taken place the day after she arrived, a brief practical affair in the office of the local judge with 2 of the man's clerks as witnesses. They had exchanged minimal words, signed the necessary documents, and walked back out into the Silver Creek afternoon as husband and wife. Clara had found the whole thing both surreal and oddly appropriate. There was no pretense in it, no performance. It matched the rest of this new life, stripped of everything decorative down to what was functional and real. Richard's wedding had been an event. 200 guests, a dress that cost more than some families made in a year. A ceremony in a church so large her voice echoed when she said her vows. She had been so proud, she realized now. She had mistaken the scale of the ceremony for evidence of the scale of what she was walking into. She had confused pageantry for love. She had been 22 and surrounded by a world that told her a good match, a wealthy husband, a prestigious name was what a woman was supposed to want, and she had wanted it so completely that she hadn't looked closely enough at the man inside the ceremony. Here, there were no flowers and no 200 guests. There was a judge who shook both their hands and told them good luck, and a clerk who misspelled her name on the first form and had to redo it, and Nathan, who held the door for her when they left, like it was simply the natural thing to do. She found she preferred it. She found, in fact, that she was beginning to prefer nearly everything about this spare, demanding, unhurried life to the life she'd left. Not because it was easier, because it absolutely was not easier, but because it was honest. What was hard here was hard because the land and the work were hard, not because someone was deliberately making it so. What was good here was genuinely good, not performed for an audience. She began to breathe differently. She noticed it herself, the way her shoulders sat, the way she moved through a room. Quieter, less braced. It was about 6 weeks after her arrival that she had her first real conversation with Nathan about something other than the practical business of the ranch. They were sitting on the back porch in the evening, the way they had fallen into the habit of doing after supper, watching the light change over the field. The cottonwoods along the creek were catching the last of the sun, and the air was cool enough that she had her shawl around her shoulders. Nathan said out of nowhere, "Did you always want to teach?" She turned to look at him. "What? In your letter," he said. "You mentioned you liked books, that you'd thought about teaching once." He paused. Before. She had almost forgotten she'd written that. A small, unguarded detail in a letter she'd written in desperation. She was surprised he'd held on to it. "Yes," she said slowly. "When I was young, before I was married." "What happened to it?" "My husband didn't think it was appropriate," she said, careful with the words. "For a woman of my station." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Did he think much was appropriate?" he asked. His voice was even. No judgment in it. Just a man asking a direct question. "Not especially," she said. He nodded slowly. "There are children in Silver Creek who can't read," he said. "I've heard talk about it. No proper schoolhouse yet. People have been trying to get something organized for years." She looked at him. "You're not asking me something," she said. "You're telling me something." The corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, but something. "Just mentioning it," he said. She looked back out at the field. She thought about a classroom. She thought about what it would mean to stand in front of a group of children and teach them something, to give them a tool, a skill, an opening into a world made of words and ideas. She thought about the small writing desk in the corner of Richard's estate, where she had been allowed occasionally to write letters he screened before they were sent. She thought about what she had told herself on that train, pressing her forehead against the cold glass as Virginia disappeared. She was free. "Tell me more about the children," she said. Nathan settled back in his chair, and he did. The trouble started on an ordinary day in late spring. Clara was in the yard hanging laundry when she heard the sound of a horse approaching, at a pace that suggested urgency. She shaded her eyes and watched a young man from town, one of the sheriff's deputies, pull up at the fence line. "Mrs. Cole," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to come out here like this. Sheriff thought you ought to know." She crossed to the fence. "Know what?" she said. The deputy turned his hat in his hands. "There's a man come into Silver Creek," he said. "Arrived on the noon stage. Eastern man, well dressed. Says he's looking for his wife." He met her eyes. "Says her name is Clara Bennett." The laundry in her hands went still. She had known this moment might come. She had thought about it on the train, and in those early wakeful nights at the ranch, and in the back of her mind on every ordinary afternoon since. She had known that Richard Whitmore was not a man who accepted loss or acknowledged that something could stop belonging to him just because it wanted to. She had known, but knowing it and standing in a sunny yard with wet laundry in her hands, while a deputy told you it was actually happening, were two entirely different things. "Where is he now?" she said. Her voice was perfectly steady, which surprised her. "Sheriff's office," the deputy said. "He came in with legal papers. Says the marriage wasn't valid. Says she—" He stopped. "Says you were removed from his care without proper authorization." removed from his care. She heard Richard's voice in those words. That precise clinical phrasing that turned a person into a possession so smoothly you almost didn't notice. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Sheriff wanted to know, does Mr. Cole know?" "He will," she said. "Soon." The deputy nodded, turned his horse, and rode back toward town. Clara stood in the yard for a moment. The laundry moved in the wind. The cottonwoods along the creek rustled. The sky was wide and blue, and indifferent the way this land always was not cruel. Just large, belonging to something older and more patient than any single person's panic. She set the laundry down. She went to find Nathan. He was in the barn working on a piece of fence equipment when she came in. He looked up when he heard her, and something in the way she was carrying herself made him set the tool down immediately. "What happened?" he said. She told him. All of it standing in the middle of his barn with her arms at her sides and her voice even watching his face as she spoke. She told him about Richard. She told him about the 3 years. She told him about the night she left the cut above her ear that was mostly healed, now the bag, the train, the darkness of the Virginia road at 4 in the morning. She told him what Richard was capable of, the connections he had, the way he moved through the world, like a man who had never once been told that something didn't belong to him. She told him because he needed to know. Because this was his life she'd brought the trouble into, and he deserved the truth. She told him, and she watched his face go very still. When she finished, the barn was quiet, except for one of the horses shifting weight in a nearby stall. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "Are you all right?" he said. Not "why didn't you tell me earlier?" Not "what does this mean for us?" Just, "are you all right?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. He nodded. "All right," he said. He picked up his hat from the post where he'd hung it and put it on. "Let's go into town." "Nathan." "He came here." Nathan said, his voice still even, but with something under it now, something quiet and iron hard. "He came to this territory with papers. He wrote himself to describe a person like she belongs in a ledger. I'd like to have a conversation about that." She looked at him. "He's dangerous," she said. "I expect he is," Nathan said. "So am I when someone's trying to take what isn't theirs." He said it plainly, without drama, and somehow that was the thing that got through every layer of fear she'd been carrying since the deputy rode away. Not a grand declaration, just a man stating a fact. She picked up her shawl from the fence post where she'd left it. "Then let's go," she said, and they walked out of the barn together into the Colorado afternoon, toward whatever was coming, neither of them looking back. Silver Creek's main street was not long, but it felt long that afternoon. Clara walked beside Nathan on the packed dirt road, and she was aware of everything. The sound of her own footsteps, the way the afternoon heat pressed down the faces of the people they passed, who glanced over and then glanced again, the way word traveled in a small town faster than horses. Someone had already talked. She could see it in the way the woman outside the dry goods store stopped sweeping and watched them go by. She could see it in the way 2 men near the saloon stepped back slightly, creating space the way people do when they sense something is about to happen and they want to be close enough to watch, but not close enough to be involved. Nathan walked like a man who had somewhere to be and was in no particular hurry about it, which was somehow more intimidating than any urgency would have been. Clara kept pace beside him and did not look at the faces watching them. The sheriff's office was at the end of the street, a squat wooden building with a single window and a door that stood open to let the air through. Clara heard Richard's voice before she reached the doorway that measured authoritative tone she knew better than she knew her own heartbeat. The tone he used when he was performing civility for an audience while making absolutely certain everyone understood he was in charge. "I appreciate your patience, Sheriff," Richard was saying. "I understand this must seem unusual, but I assure you the legal matter is entirely straightforward. My wife suffered a breakdown of sorts. She is not in a stable condition to make decisions for herself, and the man she has attached herself to has clearly taken advantage of a vulnerable woman." Clara stopped in the doorway. Richard Whitmore was standing with his back half-turned, facing the sheriff's desk, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Nathan's entire monthly income. He was exactly as she remembered. Composed, polished, the kind of handsome that photographed well and concealed everything. He had a leather satchel on the desk in front of him, and papers spread out that he'd clearly arranged to look official. The sheriff, a broad-shouldered man named Hale, who Clara had met only once before, was sitting behind his desk with his arms crossed, looking at the papers with the expression of a man who was listening carefully and believing less than half of what he heard. Richard turned when he heard footsteps and saw Clara. His face did something complicated. Relief, she thought at first, and then she understood it wasn't relief. It was satisfaction. The look of a man who has been hunting something and has just spotted it. "Clara," he said. His voice softened into something that would have sounded like concern to anyone who didn't know him. "Thank God. I've been so worried." She stepped inside the office. Nathan came in behind her. Richard's eyes moved to Nathan, and something shifted in his expression. A recalibration quick and subtle, the kind only someone who knew him well would catch. "You must be Cole," Richard said. His voice stayed pleasant. "I'd like to thank you for looking after my wife. It was charitable, but I'll take her home now." "She is home," Nathan said. Simple, final, not loud. Richard smiled the way he smiled when someone said something he intended to dismantle. "Sheriff Hale," Richard said, turning back to the desk with practiced ease. "As I was explaining, these documents confirm that Clara and I were married in Virginia in 1875. The marriage remains legally binding. Whatever arrangement she entered into here was done without the capacity to consent, given her condition." "What condition?" Clara said. Richard looked at her with an expression of patient sorrow that made her stomach turn. "Clara," he said gently, "we don't need to discuss this in front of strangers." "These are not strangers," she said. "And you don't get to decide what I discuss, or where I discuss it. That's over." A small silence. Richard held the patient expression, but something tightened around his eyes. "Sheriff," he said, "I'm sure you can see that she's agitated. This is exactly what I've been concerned about. Clara has a history of emotional instability that—" "I don't," Clara said clearly. "I have a history of being told I was unstable by a man who needed me to believe it so I'd stop trusting myself. Those are different things." Sheriff Hale looked at her. He looked at Richard. He looked at the papers on the desk. "Mr. Whitmore," he said slowly, "these documents say the marriage in Virginia was valid. But so does the marriage certificate filed right here in Silver Creek County 3 days after Mrs. Cole arrived. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm also not seeing any court order here that compels me to do anything today." Richard's pleasant expression flickered. "Sheriff, I think if you contact the authorities in Richmond—" "I intend to," Hale said. "I intend to look into this real carefully. In the meantime, I don't see any reason Mrs. Cole needs to go anywhere she doesn't choose to go." Richard looked at Clara. And there it was, the face beneath the face, just for a moment. The thing she had lived with for 3 years, the thing that existed behind the charming smile and the social composure. The cold, absolute fury of a man being told that something he considered his was not his anymore. Then it was gone. The pleasant mask came back. He picked up his papers from the desk with deliberate calm. "All right," he said. "I can see this will take more time to resolve properly. I'll be in touch with the appropriate authorities." He looked at Nathan. "Mr. Cole, I want you to understand something. I have considerable resources and a great many connections. I am a patient man." He smiled. "I hope your ranch is more stable than I've heard." Nathan looked at him for a moment. "Is that a threat?" he said. "It's an observation," Richard said pleasantly. "Then I'll make one," Nathan said. "You came a long way to remind a woman she belongs to you. She doesn't agree. I don't agree. And I expect once the sheriff looks into things the way he said he will, a lot of people are going to stop agreeing with you real fast." He held the door. "Safe travels, Mr. Whitmore." Richard walked out. Clara stood in the middle of the sheriff's office and breathed. She realized her hands were shaking. Not with fear, she understood after a moment. with something else, something that had been building for 3 years and had just been given the smallest possible release. Not enough. Not yet. But something. "You all right, Mrs. Cole?" Sheriff Hale said. "Yes," she said. "Thank you for not sending me with him." Hale looked uncomfortable in the way of a man who is decent enough to know when something is wrong and honest enough to admit he can't fix it in an afternoon. "I'm going to need to look into the legal situation," he said carefully. "I won't pretend it's simple. A man like Whitmore with what he's got in that satchel." "I know," she said. "I know it isn't simple." Nathan put his hand on the doorframe, not touching her just present. "We'll deal with what comes," he said. She nodded. They walked back out into the afternoon. Richard was gone. She could see his hired horse moving toward the town's single hotel at the far end of the street. He would stay. She had known he wouldn't leave after one conversation. Richard Whitmore did not concede. He regrouped and came back harder. "He's not done," she said quietly. "No," Nathan agreed. "He's not. He'll go after the ranch, the finances. He said as much." "I heard him." She stopped walking and turned to face Nathan on the side of the road. "Nathan," she said, "listen to me. You don't know what he's like. I do. He will contact every bank, every business connection, every legal contact he has. He will make your life difficult in ways that will cost you money you can't afford to spend and time you can't afford to lose. And he will do it with a smile on his face the entire time, because he enjoys it." She looked at him steadily. "If you want to step back from this, if you want to find a way to dissolve the marriage here and let me handle him on my own, I would understand that. I would not blame you." Nathan looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment the way he had a habit of doing, not staring her down, not performing anything, just actually looking at her like what she said was worth the full weight of his attention. "Do you want to handle him on your own?" he said. "No," she admitted. "Then we're not having this conversation," he said. "Come on, we've got cattle to check before dark." She stared at him. "That's it," she said. "That's it," he said. She shook her head slowly. Not in disbelief exactly. In something closer to wonder, the careful, guarded wonder of someone who keeps waiting for a thing to be taken away and keeps finding it still there. She fell into step beside him. "You are a very strange man, Nathan Cole," she said. "I've been told," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved in that way it had that wasn't quite a smile, but meant the same thing. They walked back toward the wagon together. Behind them, Silver Creek went on about its business. Somewhere at the end of the street, Richard Whitmore was in a hotel room planning his next move. And Clara Bennett, Clara Cole, was walking away from him in the afternoon light for the second time in her life, and this time she was not alone. Then, Richard moved quickly, which she had expected. Within 4 days of his arrival in Silver Creek, things began to shift in ways that were subtle at first and then not subtle at all. The grain supplier Nathan had been dealing with for 2 years sent a letter saying he could no longer extend credit. The man who had been coming out twice a month to help with fencing work sent his regrets and declined to return. Nathan went into the bank in Silver Creek and came back quieter than he'd left, and when Clara asked him what happened, he told her evenly that the bank had received correspondence from a lawyer in Richmond questioning the validity of certain transactions on the ranch account. "He's thorough," Nathan said. He was sitting at the kitchen table with the ledger open in front of him, and he said it the way you say something that you knew was true and had decided to simply acknowledge. "Yes," Clara said. "He is." She sat down across from him. "Show me the ledger," she said. He hesitated, not from secrecy she could tell, but from that same instinct. A lot of men had the protective one, the one that said this was his problem and his to manage. "Nathan," she said quietly, "you told me when we married that it was a partnership. Let it be one." He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned the ledger to face her. She spent an hour going over it. She had more experience with financial records than Richard had ever wanted to acknowledge, She had in fact managed most of the Whitmore household accounts quietly in the background, while Richard took credit for their precision. She ran the numbers, made notes, identified 3 places where restructuring the operation could reduce cost without reducing the herd, and 1 area where Nathan had actually been undercharging for the cattle he occasionally sold to the town. When she looked up, Nathan was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just you know what you're doing." "Richard found it useful to keep me from things I was capable of," she said. Her voice was flat. It was a control mechanism. He couldn't control something he'd made dependent on him. Nathan was quiet. "People do that," he said finally, slowly, like he was thinking it through as he said it. "Take something capable and convince it to be small, because something capable is harder to hold." "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." He looked at the notes she'd made in the margin of the ledger. "These are good," he said. "I hadn't seen it that way. Can we implement them?" "Some of them, yes. The cattle pricing, yes, definitely." He tapped one of the other notes. "This one will take some doing, but yes." "Then let's start there," she said. "Because Richard is trying to collapse your income, and the best answer to that is to build it faster than he can tear it down." Nathan looked at her across the table. "You're not scared," he said. "Not a question. An observation," and there was something in his voice, not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it. She thought about that. "I am scared," she said honestly. "I have been scared for a long time, but I've noticed something since I came here." She folded her hands on the table. "Fear is different when you have something to fight for. When I was in Virginia, I was afraid every day, and I had nothing to fight for. Now I'm afraid, and I have this." She gestured briefly, not at anything specific: the table, the ledger, the ranch outside the window, him. "It changes what fear is. It makes it fuel instead of a wall." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply, "Yeah." Like she'd articulated something he'd felt before, and not had words for. They sat there at the table for another moment, the ledger between them, and something settled between them, not romantic, or not only that, something more foundational. A recognition. 2 people discovering that the person across from them was more than they had expected in the best possible way. Then Nathan stood up and put his hat on and said, "I'm going to go talk to old Pierce about the cattle pricing." "Good," she said. He went out. She stayed at the table and started drafting a letter. She was writing to a woman in Richmond named Harriet Walsh, the wife of one of Richard's business associates, a woman Clara had always sensed knew more about the reality of Richard Whitmore than she let on in public. Clara wrote carefully, choosing every word, saying only what was necessary, asking only one thing. "Is there anyone else who has suffered what I suffered? Because if there is, I believe there is a way to make him answer for it. But I cannot do it alone." She sealed the letter and addressed it and set it beside the door to go into town the next morning. She did not know if Harriet would respond. She did not know if anything would come of it. But she had stopped waiting for someone else to fix things. That had been the other lesson Richard had taught her, the one he hadn't intended to. A woman who waited for rescue would wait forever. A woman who built the solution herself, piece by careful piece, was harder to stop. The next twist came from a direction she hadn't anticipated. It was Margaret. She arrived on the westbound stage on a Thursday morning, small and gray-haired, and carrying a single bag, and she walked straight to the sheriff's office before she did anything else, and she sat down across from Sheriff Hale and told him every single thing she had witnessed in the Whitmore estate over the course of 11 years of service. Clara found out when Nathan came in from the field and said, "There's someone here who knows you," and then stepped aside, and there was Margaret in the kitchen doorway. Clara crossed the room and took the old woman's hands, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. "You didn't have to come," Clara said finally. "I know," Margaret said. "I wanted to. It's dangerous for you. If Richard finds out..." "Richard Whitmore doesn't frighten me as much as a quiet conscience does," Margaret said crisply. "I stood by too long. I saw too much and said too little. I'm not young enough anymore to justify that. She sat down at Clara's kitchen table and drank tea and told Nathan straight and without embellishment what the Whitmore household had been. She told it the way a woman tells something she has been holding for years and finally decided to put down, not for drama, not for sympathy, just for the relief of the truth being out in the air at last. Nathan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Would you be willing to say that to the sheriff formally, put it in a statement?" Margaret had already done it. She pulled a signed document from her bag. She had been to Sheriff Hale before coming to the ranch. Clara looked at the document. Then she looked at Margaret. "Why now?" she said softly. Margaret met her eyes. "Because you ran," she said. "And when I heard you'd actually gotten out, I thought if she's brave enough to run, I can at least be brave enough to tell the truth." She paused. "You always were the brave one, Clara. You just didn't know it yet." Clara pressed her lips together and looked at the table for a moment. "I didn't feel brave," she said. "You never do," Margaret said simply. "That's what makes it brave." The letter from Harriet Walsh arrived 12 days later. It was short. It said only, "There are 3 others. They have been waiting for someone to go first. You went first. Write to me again with what you need." Clara read it twice. Then she put it in the drawer with the letter from Nathan Cole that had started all of this, the one from the Denver newspaper that Margaret had left beside the back staircase in a house in Virginia what felt like a lifetime ago. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the field. 3 others. Richard Whitmore had done this before. He had done it to other women, and he had walked away from each of them untouched, because none of them had had what Clara had found, not just the courage to leave, but somewhere to go, and someone who made her strong enough to fight back. She thought about what Nathan had said in the barn. "I'd like to have a conversation about that." She thought about what she had said to Richard in the sheriff's office. That's over. She thought about the terrified woman on the westbound train pressing her forehead against the cold glass at 4 in the morning, the woman who thought she was just trying to survive. That woman had not known what she was starting. Richard appeared again that evening, not in person this time. Through one of the men he'd hired, a lawyer from Denver, who rode out to the ranch with a formal notice that Richard Whitmore was filing suit against Nathan Cole for interference in a marriage, alienation of affection, and financial fraud. Nathan read the document twice. His jaw was very still. "Interference in a marriage," he said. "It's a legal tactic," Clara said. "It's designed to cost us time and money. Can he win?" Clara thought about it honestly. "Not if we have what I think we're building," she said. Margaret's statement. Harriet's letter. If the other 3 women agree to come forward. She paused. A man with 1 enemy looks like a man who made a mistake. A man with 4 witnesses looks like a pattern. Nathan set the document on the table. "What do you need from me?" he said. She looked at him. "Keep the ranch running," she said. "Don't let him scare you into bad decisions. Let me handle the correspondence." She straightened. "And trust me." "I do trust you," he said. He said it like it wasn't a complicated thing. Like trust was not a rare and carefully hoarded resource, but simply a thing you extended to a person who had earned it. She had forgotten that trust could feel like that. She had forgotten that being believed didn't have to cost anything. "All right then," she said, and she sat down and picked up her pen. Over the following 3 weeks, Clara wrote letters she should have been writing for years. She wrote to Harriet Walsh with specifics and questions. She wrote to a lawyer in Denver, not Richard's one she found through Sheriff Hale's recommendation, and laid out the full account of her marriage, her escape, and Richard's actions since his arrival in Colorado. She wrote a detailed account of her own that she signed and had notarized at the county seat. She built a case the way she had built her new life, carefully, piece by piece, with the focused patience of a woman who had learned that nothing worth having came without the work. Richard, for his part, did not stay in Silver Creek. He came and went 1 week present, making his slow social campaign through the town the next week, gone presumably managing his affairs in Richmond, while his lawyer managed the legal assault here. Each time he appeared, he seemed a little less certain than before. The composed veneer held but Clara, who knew that veneer better than anyone alive, could see the tension in it. He had expected her to fold. He had expected the legal pressure to frighten Nathan into pushing her away. He had expected isolation and financial strain to break her the way they had broken her before. What he had not expected was Margaret. He had not expected Harriet Walsh's letter. He had not expected Clara to know how to read a ledger and strengthen a ranch's finances, while simultaneously building a legal case against him. He had not expected Nathan Cole, who could not be threatened or bought or charmed, who showed up every morning and worked his land and stood beside his wife with the uncomplicated steadiness of a man who had made a decision and was not interested in revisiting it. He had not expected Clara to become who she was becoming. She was changing, and she could feel it, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the accumulation of days. In the moment, she had given her statement to the Denver lawyer without flinching. In the evening, she and Nathan had sat on the back porch and laughed. Actually laughed at something stupid the barn cat had done, and she had not startled herself with the sound of it. In the morning, she had stood at the edge of the field, watching the sun come up, and realized she had not, for the first time in longer than she could remember, woken up afraid. She was not healed. She understood the difference. She still flinched sometimes at sudden sounds. She still had nights that were not easy. The fear did not disappear. It shifted position, moved from the center of her chest to somewhere smaller, something she could carry without it carrying her. But she was here. She was building something. She had people beside her. And Richard Whitmore was running out of room. It was Nathan who told her that things were changing in town, that people were talking, and not the way they'd talked in the beginning, when Richard arrived with his polished suit and his official papers, and his voice designed to sound like reason. People in Silver Creek had watched Clara for months now. They had watched her learn the ranch, help with the school organization meetings, bring food to the Cooper family when their youngest got sick, sit with old Pierce when he needed someone to talk to. They had watched Nathan, who had never been particularly social, who had kept to himself for years, come into town more often, walk beside his wife with a quietness that was not indifference, but something much closer to contentment. They had watched two people become something real, and they had formed an opinion about it the way small towns always do. When Richard's lawyer made his case at the county courthouse, he found the gallery fuller than he'd expected. He found Sheriff Hale's formal testimony about Richard's behavior on arrival more detailed than he'd anticipated. He found the notarized statements from Margaret and from Clara herself more thorough than he'd prepared for. He found attached to a letter from a lawyer in Richmond the names of 3 other women and a summary of what they were prepared to testify. He found that Richard Whitmore, who had come to Silver Creek to collect what he believed was his, had instead walked into the slow-building consequence of every choice he had ever made. The hearing lasted 2 days. Clara sat in that courtroom on both days upright, composed, wearing the brown dress she'd bought herself with the first money she'd earned helping organize the school reading program. Nathan sat beside her, hat in his hands, quiet and steady as he always was. When it was over, Richard's case was not simply dismissed. The judge, a methodical man from Colorado Springs who had read every document twice, referred the matter of the Virginia marriage to the relevant Virginia court with a formal recommendation and made a finding in the Colorado jurisdiction that the marriage between Clara Cole and Nathan Cole was valid and binding. Richard Whitmore walked out of that courthouse and got on the next stage east without speaking to anyone. Clara watched him go from the courthouse steps. She stood there until the stage was out of sight, and then she breathed out slowly through her nose. Nathan came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there in the afternoon light, his hat back on his shoulder a few inches from hers. After a moment she said, "Is it always this quiet after what? After the thing you've been dreading finally happens and then it's over?" He thought about that. "I reckon so," he said. "The dread is louder than the thing itself usually." She nodded slowly. "Margaret is going to stay," she said. "If that's all right. She has nowhere to go back to, and I'd like her here." "The more the merrier," Nathan said. "You don't mean that," she said. "You're a man who genuinely enjoys quiet." "I meant it anyway," he said. She looked at him. She thought about the advertisement in the Denver newspaper. Honest and decent man seeking a wife not for beauty or status, but for companionship and mutual respect. She thought about the letter she'd written crouched over a desk in Virginia while Richard slept. She thought about the train and the cold glass and the enormous unfamiliar sky of the Colorado Territory opening up outside the window. She thought about how frightened she had been. She thought about all the things she had not known. "Nathan," she said. I didn't tell you enough before what you did. Letting me come, not asking questions, the way you handled all of this." She paused. "I'm grateful." He turned to look at her directly. "Clara," he said, "you came west on a train by yourself with one bag and a letter from a stranger, and you rebuilt a life from nothing while fighting off a man with more money and connections than either of us. I think you've got the accounting of this backwards." She felt something shift in her chest, something warm and a little painful. The way things are when they've been frozen for a long time and start to thaw. "We did it," she said quietly. "Yeah," he said. "We did." They stood there on the courthouse steps in Silver Creek, Colorado in the year 1878, while the town went on around them, ordinary and unhurried, and entirely indifferent to the fact that two people standing on those steps had just finished something enormous and were standing at the beginning of something else, something that had no dread in it, only possibility. The quiet that followed Richard's departure lasted exactly 11 days. Clara counted them. Not because she was waiting for something to go wrong, or not only because of that, but because 11 days of ordinary life felt like something worth marking. 11 mornings of waking up without dread sitting on her chest. 11 evenings on the back porch with Nathan. 11 nights of sleep that were not perfect, but were hers uninterrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway that meant she needed to compose herself before the door opened. On the 12th day, a letter arrived from Richmond. It was not from Richard directly. It was from his lawyer, a different one than the man who had appeared at the courthouse, someone more senior by the weight of the letterhead. The language was careful and formal, and said beneath all the legal phrasing exactly one thing: Richard Whitmore was not finished. He had filed a complaint with the Virginia courts regarding the dissolution of the first marriage. He was challenging the Colorado jurisdiction. He was claiming that Clara had been mentally incapacitated at the time of her second marriage, and therefore the union with Nathan Cole was void. He had attached a signed statement from a physician in Richmond, a Dr. Harlan Morse, whose name Clara recognized with a cold dropping sensation in her stomach, attesting to her history of nervous episodes and emotional instability. She stood at the kitchen table and read the letter twice. Then she set it down very carefully, the way you set down something you are resisting the urge to tear apart. Margaret was at the stove. She heard the silence and turned around, and one look at Clara's face told her everything. "What did he do?" Margaret said. "Harlan Morse," Clara said. Margaret's expression went flat and hard. "That man," she said with a quietness that carried more weight than shouting would have, "was paid by Richard 3 separate times to write reports saying whatever Richard needed them to say. I saw the payments in the household accounts. I know what I saw." Clara looked up. "You saw the payments." "I did." "Margaret." Clara's voice was very controlled. "Did you include that in your statement to Sheriff Hale?" A beat of silence. "I mentioned the reports," Margaret said slowly. "I didn't mention the payments specifically. I didn't know they mattered." "They matter enormously," Clara said. "Can you remember the amounts, the dates?" "I kept notes," Margaret said quietly. "Old habit. I've kept notes on a great many things over 11 years. She paused. "I didn't know if I'd ever need them. I kept them anyway." Clara stared at her. "Where are they?" "In my bag," Margaret said. "I brought everything that mattered when I came west." 30 minutes later, they were sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, with Margaret's small notebook open between them, and Clara was copying figures and dates in her precise handwriting onto a fresh sheet of paper, and the thing that Richard had intended as a killing blow was becoming piece by piece the evidence that would bury him. When Nathan came in from the field and saw the two of them bent over the table with the focused intensity of women building something, he stopped in the doorway and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Do I need to go to town?" "Yes," Clara said without looking up. "We need to send a wire to the lawyer in Denver, tonight if possible." He turned around and went back out to saddle the horse. She heard the hoofbeats fading toward Silver Creek and felt something she was still not entirely accustomed to feeling, the solid, reliable knowledge that when she needed someone beside her, he would be there. Not because he was required to be, because he chose to be every single time. She bent back over the paper and kept writing. The Denver lawyer's name was Thomas Aldridge, and he arrived in Silver Creek 4 days later with an associate half his age and a briefcase that suggested he took the case very seriously. He sat at Clara and Nathan's kitchen table, which had become, Clara reflected, the center of a great deal of consequential activity, and he read Margaret's notes with the careful attention of a man assembling a mechanism. When he finished, he looked up. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "I want to be direct with you. What you have here is significant. Payments from Richard Whitmore to a physician who then produced documentation supporting Whitmore's claims about your mental state. That is not medical testimony. That is purchased testimony. In a Virginia court with the right judge, this could be characterized as fraud." "Could be," she said. "Will depend on several things," he said. "Corroboration being chief among them. Is there anyone else who might have witnessed these payments or similar arrangements?" Clara thought. She thought about the household at the Whitmore estate, the staff who had moved quietly through those rooms, seeing everything and saying nothing, because their livelihood depended on it. She thought about the social circle Richard had cultivated, men who benefited from his business connections, and women who smiled at his dinner parties and had no idea or had ideas they refused to look at directly. She thought about the 3 names in Harriet Walsh's letter. "There may be," she said. "I need to write some letters." Aldridge nodded. "There's something else," he said. He pulled a second document from his briefcase. "While preparing for this, I made some inquiries in Richmond. I spoke with a colleague who practices there." He set the document on the table. "Richard Whitmore has been involved in 3 prior legal disputes involving women. None of them went anywhere. The women were either persuaded to withdraw or discredited before they got to court." He paused. "In one case, the woman in question was committed to a private institution shortly before the hearing date." The room went very quiet. Clara heard that sentence the way you hear something you suspected but didn't let yourself fully believe until someone said it plainly. The institution. Richard had been planning to send her to an institution before she escaped. She had known it. She had found the letters, the preliminary arrangements, but hearing it confirmed as a pattern, as something he had done before to someone else, made it real in a different way. Made it not just her story. Made it something larger and darker and more necessary to stop. "How many women?" Nathan said. His voice was quiet, extremely quiet. "That I could confirm too. There may be others." Nathan looked at the document. Then he looked at Clara. She looked back at him, and something passed between them that didn't need words, a shared understanding of what this meant, what it changed, what it made necessary. "What do we need to do?" she said to Aldridge. "We need those letters written," he said. "And we need the Virginia courts to receive our response before Richard's challenge gains traction. Time matters here, Mrs. Cole." "Then let's not waste it," she said. She picked up her pen. The next 3 weeks were the hardest she had experienced since arriving in Colorado, which was saying something. Not hard in the way the early days on the ranch had been hard. The physical difficulty, the steep learning curve, the daily negotiation with her own fear. This was a different kind of hard. This was the kind that required her to sit very still and think very clearly, while a part of her wanted to do neither. She wrote 6 letters. She received 4 replies. 2 of the women Richard had targeted before her wrote back with accounts that mirrored her own, with a precision that made her hands shake when she read them. The same language. The same physician's name, Morse appearing in both accounts, though in one case the woman had managed to avoid the institution because her brother had intervened in time. The same pattern of isolation controlled the slow erosion of a person's belief in her own perception. The third reply was from a woman who said only that she was sorry she could not be involved. She had children to protect, and she did not believe anything would change. Clara read that letter and held it for a long time before she set it down, and she did not judge the woman. She understood with a clarity she could not have had a year ago exactly what that kind of fear felt like. She understood the calculation the way you weighed the cost of speaking against the cost of silence, and sometimes because the speaking felt like standing in front of a fire, chose silence. She hoped the woman was safe. She hoped the children were safe. She wrote her a single line back. "If you ever change your mind, I will be here." The fourth reply came from Harriet Walsh herself, and it was the one that changed everything. Harriet had not simply written a supportive letter. Harriet had, over the previous weeks, done something that Clara had not asked her to do and had not expected. She had talked to people. Carefully, quietly, the way a woman moves through a social world, she has spent decades learning to navigate, asking the right questions of the right people at the right moment. And what she had found was this: Dr. Harlan Morse had a professional rival in Richmond, a Dr. Emmett Clark, who had been trying to report Morse's practices to the state medical board for 2 years and had been blocked at every attempt by the influence of a very prominent Richmond businessman. Richard Whitmore's name did not appear anywhere official in relation to those blocked reports. But Harriet knew which doors Richard's money had opened and which ones it had quietly closed, and she had found 3 members of the medical board who were willing, if approached correctly, to reopen the inquiry into Morse's practice. Clara read Harriet's letter 3 times. Then she stood up and walked to the window and stood there for a moment, just breathing. When she came back to the table, she was already thinking about what to write. She looked up and found Nathan watching her from the doorway with his hat in his hands, and that expression he had, the careful, steady one that never asked her to be smaller than she was. "Good news or complicated news?" he said. "Both," she said. "Complicated news that could become very good news if we handle it right." "Then we'll handle it right," he said. She told him what Harriet had found. She watched his face move through the information. Not slowly. He was not a slow thinker, just deliberate, and she watched him arrive at the same place she had. "If Morse goes down," he said, "the statement he signed for Richard goes with him. And if the statement goes," Clara said, "Richard's entire case about my mental incapacity collapses. It's the foundation. Without it, he has nothing in the Colorado case. And in Virginia," she paused. "In Virginia, with 2 women's accounts and Margaret's notes and a medical board inquiry, he doesn't just lose the legal challenge. He loses his standing." Nathan thought about that. "How long?" he said. "Aldridge thinks 6 to 8 weeks before the Virginia courts respond to our filing. The medical board inquiry could take longer." She folded her hands on the table. "Richard knows we're building something. He's going to move before we finish building it if he can." "Then what's his next move?" She had been thinking about that. "He'll try to discredit me here," she said, "in Silver Creek specifically. He's already worked on the business relationships, the grain supplier, the bank. The legal route is slower than he thought. So he'll go social. He'll try to make people here doubt what they think they know about me." Nathan looked at her. "Let him try," he said flatly. "Nathan in a town this size, Clara." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, and he leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "I've lived here for 12 years. I've been quiet and kept to myself and not asked anything of anybody. I've got goodwill saved up that I've never spent." His voice was matter-of-fact. "I'm going to spend it." She looked at him. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said. "I want to. There's a difference." He paused. "You know what you told me on the courthouse steps, that we did it?" "Yes." "I meant that. Both directions. Whatever's coming, we do it the same way." She held his gaze for a moment. She thought about the woman who had gotten on that westbound train with nothing but fear and a stranger's letter. She thought about all the ways she had braced for Nathan to become someone else, to show the face behind the face the way Richard had. She thought about how long she had been waiting for the proof that she had made the same mistake twice. She thought about how it felt to have finally, after all this time, run out of evidence for that fear. "All right," she said, "then here's what I need you to do." Richard arrived again on a Wednesday. This time, he didn't go to the sheriff's office first. He went to the saloon, which was where men in Silver Creek went when they wanted to talk to other men in a setting that felt unofficial and social, and he ordered a whiskey, and he began very smoothly and very deliberately doing what Clara had predicted he would do. He told stories, not outright lies. Richard was too sophisticated for outright lies in settings where they could be checked. He told partial truths, shaped carefully, the way a man carves wood until what remained looked like what he wanted it to look like. He talked about Clara's volatility, about the episodes he had managed at great personal cost, about how worried he had been when she disappeared, about the good man Nathan Cole being taken advantage of by a woman with a history that Nathan didn't fully understand. He was good at it. Clara knew he was good at it. She had watched him do it in Virginia ballrooms for years. What he did not know was that Nathan Cole had spent the previous 10 days doing something he had never done in 12 years in Silver Creek. He had talked to people, not about Richard, not defensively, not in response to anything. He had simply started showing up in places he usually didn't. The grain store, the barber shop, the front steps of the church on Sunday morning, and talking to people the way a man talks, when he has decided that the people around him deserve to know him better than he has previously allowed. He talked about the ranch. He talked about Clara's work on the school reading program. He talked without drama or self-pity about what the past year had meant to him, finding someone who made the work feel like it was for something. People listened. People in small towns always listen. And they had their own eyes, which had been watching Clara Cole for months, and their own judgment, which was sharper than Richard Whitmore had given it credit for. So when Richard sat in that saloon and began his careful work, he found the ground less receptive than he expected. He found men who said politely that they'd known Nathan Cole a long time and had their own opinion of his character. He found women who had watched Clara help organize the school program and had seen nothing in her that matched what he was describing. He found a town that had already made up its mind. He was still there, adapting his approach, trying different angles, when Sheriff Hale came in and sat down across from him. Hale set a piece of paper on the table. "This came in on the wire this morning," Hale said. "From a colleague of mine in Richmond." He waited while Richard picked it up and read it. Clara found out later what was on that paper. It was a communication from the Richmond authorities noting that a formal inquiry had been opened into the financial practices of Dr. Harlan Morse, specifically regarding payments received from private individuals in exchange for professional certifications. The inquiry was being conducted in cooperation with the Virginia State Medical Board. She found out that Richard had gone very still when he read it. She found out that he had set the paper down carefully and picked up his whiskey glass and finished what was in it. She found out that he had looked at Hale and said in a voice that was still composed but thinner than it should have been, "This doesn't change anything." And Hale had said quietly, "Mr. Whitmore, I think it changes a great deal." Clara was not there for any of this. She was at the ranch at the kitchen table, writing the final piece of correspondence she needed to send to Aldridge. She found out everything afterward from Hale himself and from 3 other people who had been in the saloon, and felt she deserved to know what had happened. What she knew in the moment was only that Nathan came home that evening and sat down at the table across from her and said, Hale showed him the wire. She set down her pen. How did he take it? "Like a man who's been told the floor is moving," Nathan said. "Still standing. Hasn't fallen yet. But he knows." She let out a slow breath. "He'll come here," she said. "Before he leaves. He won't be able to help it." "I know," Nathan said. "Let him come." She looked at the letter she'd been writing. Then she looked at Nathan. "If he comes," she said carefully, "I need to be the one who talks to him, not you, me." Nathan held her gaze. "Why?" he said. Because this started between him and me, she said, and it needs to end that way. He needs to hear from me directly, not from a judge, not from a lawyer, not from you, that it's over, that I am not going back, that nothing he does from this point forward will change that. She paused. He needs to look at me and see that I'm not afraid of him anymore. That's the only language he actually understands. A long silence. Are you afraid of him? Nathan said. She thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. Some. Old fear. The kind that lives in your body even when your mind has moved on. She held his gaze. But not enough to stop me. Nathan was quiet for a moment. I'll be close, he said. I won't interfere, but I'll be close. She nodded. That's all I need, she said. Richard came the next morning. He rode out to the ranch alone, which she had not expected. She had expected him to bring his lawyer to arrive with documentation to make it official. Instead, it was just him on a hired horse pulling up to the front of the ranch house in his expensive suit that was starting to look slightly wrong out here, slightly too much the way overdressed people look when the occasion finally shows them what it actually requires. Clara came out to the porch when she heard the horse. She stood at the top of the porch steps with her arms at her sides, and she watched him dismount. He came to the base of the steps and stopped. They looked at each other. This was the longest they had been face to face without other people in the room since she had escaped Virginia, and she felt it, the old weight of him, the gravity he had exerted on her life for 3 years. It was still there. It was simply not strong enough to move her anymore. Clara, he said. Richard, you know what the inquiry into Morse means, he said. Even if his testimony is questioned, the Virginia matter is still... I know what the Virginia matter is, she said. I have a very good lawyer. This can still be resolved quietly, he said. I'm willing to... No, she said. He stopped. You haven't heard what I'm offering. It doesn't matter what you're offering, she said. There is nothing you have that I want. There is nothing you can say that will change what I have built here. There is nothing you can threaten that I haven't already faced and lived through. She looked at him steadily. You made me believe for 3 years that I was nothing, that I was sick, unstable, incapable of managing my own life. You paid a doctor to write it down so you'd have proof when you needed it. Her voice stayed even, completely even. I spent those 3 years being small because you needed me to be. I am done being small. Richard's face did something she had never seen it do before. Not anger, she had seen his anger in all its forms. Not condescension. Something more unsettled than either. The expression of a man who has met a version of a person he thought he knew completely and does not recognize what he is looking at. You are my wife, he said, and for just a moment, his voice lost the smooth control she had always known it by. I was trying to protect you. I was capable, she said. I was capable, and you were afraid of that, so you made me doubt it. That's the truth of it, Richard. Not illness, not instability, fear. Yours. Silence. A long silence, in which the Colorado wind moved through the gap between them, and Richard Whitmore stood at the base of her porch steps, looking at a woman he had broken, or believed he had broken, and finding instead someone who had been rebuilt from the inside out by the very destruction he'd intended. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. You can't win this entirely, he said. The Virginia courts will receive everything Margaret recorded, she said. Everything Harriet found. The accounts from the other women. The payment records for Dr. Morse. She tilted her head slightly. You should know that I don't need to win entirely, Richard. I only need to win enough. Enough that your reputation, your standing, your business connections, all of it becomes a question. I only need one judge in Virginia to look at the pattern and call it what it is. She paused. How many of your business partners do you think will stay once that question is publicly asked? His jaw tightened. You would destroy yourself in the process, he said. Your name. My name, she said, is Clara Cole, and I have a school to help build. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she said, Goodbye, Richard. I hope you make better choices with what's left. I genuinely do. She stepped back toward the door. Don't come back here. She went inside. She heard him stand at the base of those steps for a long time. She heard his horse eventually. She heard the hoofbeats move away, and she stood at the kitchen window and watched the dust settle, and then she sat down at the table, and she pressed both hands flat against the wood. They were not shaking. She noticed that. For the first time in a very long time, her hands were completely still. Nathan came in through the back door a few minutes later. He had been close as he promised. He took one look at her face, and he crossed the room, and he sat down beside her, not across from her, beside her, and he didn't say anything right away. After a moment, she said, "He's gone." "I know," Nathan said. "I watched him ride out." "I don't think he'll come back," she said. "He might keep trying through lawyers for a while, but I don't think he'll come back himself." "No," Nathan agreed. "I don't think he will." She looked down at her hands, still flat against the table. "I wasn't afraid," she said softly. "I mean, I was underneath, but I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid of the feeling, and then I felt it, and I just kept talking anyway." "That's courage," Nathan said simply. "That's exactly what it is." She lifted her eyes to look at him. "You were close," she said. "I told you I would be." "Yes," she said. "You did." She let out a long breath. Outside, the afternoon was going about its business, the cattle, the field, the wind through the cottonwoods along the creek. All of it ordinary. All of it hers. "Nathan," she said. The school program. Mrs. Alderton said they need someone to lead the reading sessions starting next month. I told her I'd think about it. He turned to look at her. "You don't need to think about it," he said. "You've known the answer since the second week you were here." She almost smiled. "I want to start building a proper classroom," she said. "Not just the sessions, an actual space, something permanent." "I'll help," he said. "It'll be a lot of work." "Most things worth doing are," he said. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the newspaper, the advertisement, companionship and mutual respect. She thought about how inadequate those words were for what this had become, and also how precisely right they had been as a beginning, the seeds of something that had grown into this, into the two of them at this table on this afternoon with Richard Whitmore riding away behind them and a school to build ahead. She thought about the terrified woman on the train, and she felt something she could only describe as tenderness toward her. You didn't know she thought. You had no idea what you were going toward. You were only running away. And look what you found. "All right," she said aloud. She picked up her pen. She started writing a letter to Mrs. Alderton about the school. The letter to Mrs. Alderton about the school went out on a Friday, and by Monday, Clara had a response, a meeting time, and 3 other women from Silver Creek who wanted to be involved. She had not expected that last part. She had imagined herself building something slowly, quietly, the way she had built everything else since coming west, careful and methodical, not drawing too much attention. But it turned out, Silver Creek had been waiting for someone to simply start, and the moment Clara put her name to the beginning of something, other people found it easier to add theirs. Mrs. Alderton was a practical woman in her 50s, who had been trying to organize a proper school for 4 years and kept running into the same 2 problems, no dedicated space, and no one willing to commit the time to lead it. She sat across from Clara at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table that had hosted so many consequential conversations over the past months, and she looked at Clara with the direct appraisal of a woman who had been disappointed before and was deciding whether to hope again. "You understand this won't be easy," she said. "We've had people offer before. It tends to fall apart when the reality of it sets in." "I'm familiar with things being harder than expected," Clara said. "I find I don't mind it as much as I used to." Mrs. Alderton studied her for a moment. "Nathan Cole's wife," she said. Not unkindly. "Just placing her." "Yes," Clara said. "And formerly Richard Whitmore's, which I suspect you already know." "I do," Mrs. Alderton said. "I also know you stood on a courthouse steps last month and didn't look like a woman who was beaten." "I wasn't," Clara said. "Not anymore." Another studying look. "All right," Mrs. Alderton said, and she opened the folder she'd brought. Here's what we have so far. What they had was less than Clara had hoped, and more than she'd feared: a partial donation of lumber from one of the local ranchers, a tentative commitment of a plot of land from the town council that had been under discussion for 2 years without resolution, and a list of 14 children between the ages of 6 and 12 whose parents had expressed interest in formal schooling. 14 children. Clara looked at that number and felt something move in her chest. She had once imagined standing in front of a classroom when she was young, when she was the kind of young that still believed the shape of your life was something you got to choose. Before the years of being told that what she wanted was not appropriate, not suitable, not what was expected of a woman of her station. She had put that dream away so completely that she had almost forgotten the shape of it. Looking at that number 14, she remembered. "I'll need books," she said. "Readers' primers. I can write to publishers in Denver." "We have some," Mrs. Alderton said. "Not enough. I'll write anyway. Some publishers donate to frontier schools. I've read about it. We can also write to the churches. Education is something congregations tend to support." Clara was already thinking 3 moves ahead, the way she'd learned to think during the months of building the legal case against Richard. The same discipline, different purpose. "The lumber, how much do we have?" "Enough for a single room if we're not extravagant about it." "A single room is all we need to start," Clara said. "How soon can we break ground?" Mrs. Alderton blinked. "You want to move quickly." "I have spent enough of my life waiting for permission to do things I was capable of doing," Clara said. "I find I prefer to move." A beat of silence. Then Mrs. Alderton laughed, a genuine surprised laugh that changed the whole texture of her face. "I think," she said, "that Silver Creek is going to be very glad you got on that train." Nathan helped break ground on the schoolroom 3 weeks later on a Saturday morning when half a dozen men from town showed up with tools because Nathan had asked, and because people in Silver Creek had a way of responding to a direct, honest ask from a man they respected. Clara had not expected them. Nathan had not told her he was going to ask. When she came out in the morning and found 6 men and a pile of lumber, and Nathan directing the whole thing with the quiet efficiency of someone who has organized labor, before she stopped on the porch and stood there for a moment. Nathan looked up and saw her face. "Seemed faster with more hands," he said simply. She looked at the men working at the plot of land that was going to become a place where children learned to read, and she thought about every version of herself that had existed before this. The young woman who wanted to teach and was told it wasn't appropriate. The prisoner in the Whitmore estate who read books in secret because it was one of the few things left that was hers. The terrified woman on the train who couldn't have imagined standing on this porch watching this happen. She pressed her lips together hard and went back inside before anyone could see her face. Margaret was at the stove and saw her anyway. "Good," Margaret said. "Very good," Clara said, and her voice only broke slightly on the second word. Margaret handed her a cup of coffee and said nothing else, which was exactly right. The work on the schoolroom went faster than Clara expected. Which she was learning was a pattern with things that had enough people behind them. By the end of the second Saturday, it had walls. By the end of the third, it had a roof. Clara spent the intervening days writing letters to publishers, to churches, to a women's educational society in Denver she had read about, to Harriet Walsh, asking whether there was anyone in Richmond's more progressive circles who might donate books to a frontier school. Harriet's response arrived with a note that made Clara sit down. "I have spoken with 4 women who have each offered to send a crate of books. They all know who you are, Clara. You are becoming something of a legend in certain circles here." Clara read that sentence twice, and then set the letter down and stared at the wall. A legend. She who had fled in the dark with a carpetbag and a crumpled letter. She who had burned 3 meals in a row on a ranch stove and cried silently into the dishwater because she was so exhausted and so frightened and so determined not to let Nathan see either. She picked the letter back up and read the rest of it. And then she found the line buried near the end, written in Harriet's careful script, that made her breath stop. Richard Whitmore resigned from the Richmond Commerce Board last Tuesday. Quietly, without announcement. I have it on good authority that 2 of his largest business partners have declined to renew their agreements with him. The inquiry into Morse has become rather public. People are beginning to ask questions. Clara stood up and walked to the window. She stood there for a long time. She did not feel triumphant, which surprised her. She had expected triumph or something like it. The satisfaction of a wrong being righted a debt being collected. What she felt instead was quieter and more complicated. Something like release. Like a knot she had been holding tight for so long, she'd forgotten she was holding it, had finally come loose. He wasn't destroyed. He was diminished. The world he had built on other people's silence was beginning to ask him to account for itself, and he was stepping back rather than face it. It wasn't justice in a clean, complete sense. She had lived long enough to know that justice rarely arrived that way. But it was enough. It was more than enough. She turned away from the window and went back to her letters. The first day of school came on a Tuesday morning in late October. 11 children showed up, 3 fewer than on the list, because 2 families had concerns. Clara hadn't fully anticipated, and one boy broke his arm the week before, and his mother kept him home. Clara stood at the front of the single room with its rough wooden walls and its 5 long benches and its stack of donated books in the corner, and she looked at 11 children looking back at her, and she felt something she had been building toward for a long time arrive all at once. Not triumph, not relief, something warmer and more rooted than either. Purpose. "Good morning," she said. "My name is Mrs. Cole. We are going to learn some things today. But first, I want to ask you something." 11 pairs of eyes watched her. "What do you want to know?" she said. "Not what you think you're supposed to want to know. What actually makes you curious?" A pause. Children looked at each other with the sideways uncertainty of people being given unexpected latitude. Then a small girl in the front row, dark-haired, serious-faced, maybe 7 years old, raised her hand. "Why do stars come out at night?" she said. "Excellent question," Clara said. "We may not get to that today, but we will get there." She smiled. "Let's start with reading. Because once you can read, you can find the answer to almost anything you want to know." She opened the primer. 11 children leaned forward, and Clara Bennett, who had once been told that teaching was not appropriate for a woman of her station, began to teach. Hoy. Nathan came to see the schoolroom for the first time that evening after the children had gone home, and Clara was straightening the benches and stacking the books in order of size the way she liked them. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the space, the simple, rough-walled room, the benches, the small chalkboard that 2 of the men had installed last weekend, the stack of books in the corner with their donated spines. Then he said, "How was it?" She turned and looked at him. "A girl asked me why stars come out at night," she said. "What did you tell her?" "I told her we'd get there." He nodded slowly. "Good answer," he said. She looked around the room for a moment. "Nathan," she said, "do you know what I thought about today while I was teaching?" "What?" "I thought about the fact that Richard specifically told me twice that teaching was beneath the wife of a man in his position, that it was appropriate for women who had no other options." She paused. "I thought about that today while 11 children were learning to read, and I thought he was wrong about so many things, but he was most wrong about that one. Because this isn't beneath anything. This is the most important thing I've ever done." Nathan looked at her. Something in his face shifted in the way it rarely did, not his usual quiet steadiness, but something that went deeper, something unguarded. "I know," he said. "I've known that since the day you told me you wanted to build this." She crossed the room and stood in front of him. She said, "I have been trying to figure out how to say something to you for a while." He waited. "When I came here," she said carefully, "I was looking for a way out. That's the honest truth. I wasn't looking for a life I didn't believe I was allowed to want a life anymore. I was looking for a door." She held his gaze. "You were the door. But then I walked through it and found this." She gestured slightly. "The ranch, the school. Margaret drinking tea in my kitchen every morning. The people in this town who have been kinder to me than I deserved from strangers." Her voice was very steady. And you, who never once made me feel small, who picked up my bag on a train platform and drove me 40 minutes on a rough road and let the silence be enough. She paused. I don't know how to repay that. You don't repay it, Nathan said. His voice was low and even. That's not how it works. Then how does it work? You just... He thought for a moment the careful thinking she had come to know as his, the kind that didn't rush toward an answer before it was ready. You just keep being here, he said. That's the whole thing. You keep being here, and I keep being here, and that's what it is. She looked at him. She thought about all the words she had given to letters over the past months. The precise, careful language of legal documents and correspondence and educational planning. She thought about how strange it was that the most important things didn't seem to need that many words. I can do that, she said. I know you can, he said. Outside, Silver Creek was doing what it always did in the early evening, winding down, settling in the ordinary rhythm of a frontier town that asked something real of every person in it, every single day. Inside the schoolroom, two people stood close enough that the distance between them was a choice, and the choice was made. And it was the simplest and most consequential choice either of them had made since a westbound train and a 4-word letter. She leaned forward, and he met her. And what passed between them there in that rough-walled room was not the elaborate performance of the Whitmore Estate ballroom, or the desperate hope of a train platform in Virginia. It was something much smaller and much more permanent. The kind of thing that doesn't announce itself. The kind that simply is. God. The letter from Aldridge came 3 weeks later. Clara was in the schoolroom when Margaret brought it out, walking the quarter-mile from the ranch house with her coat buttoned against the November wind, holding the envelope in both hands, like it was something fragile. The children had just been dismissed. Clara was erasing the chalkboard, her back to the door, when she heard Margaret's footsteps. She turned. Margaret's face told her something before she read a single word. It's from Aldridge, Margaret said. Clara took the envelope. She opened it at the small desk in the corner of the schoolroom in the chair that was slightly too small for an adult, and she read it carefully all the way through before she said anything. The Virginia court had issued its ruling. The first marriage to Richard Whitmore had been found voidable on the grounds of fraud and coercion based on the evidence submitted, including Margaret's records, the medical board's preliminary findings regarding Dr. Morse, and the supporting testimony of 2 additional witnesses. The ruling did not use the word abuse, but it used language that meant the same thing. Language chosen carefully by judges who had read every document twice and knew what the facts supported. The Colorado marriage was not in question. Richard Whitmore's legal challenge had been formally dismissed. Clara read the ruling twice. Then she set it down on the desk in the schoolroom she had built in the town she had chosen, in the life she had assembled from nothing, and she folded her hands on top of it, and she sat very still for a moment. Clara, Margaret said softly. I'm all right, Clara said. I know you are, Margaret said. That's not what I meant. Clara looked up. Margaret was watching her with the expression she had when she wasn't bothering to hide how much she felt something. He can't touch you anymore, Margaret said. Not legally, not here. She paused. It's done. Clara pressed her lips together. It's done, she said quietly. She thought about what it had taken to get here. Not just the letters and the lawyers and the legal strategy that was the architecture, the visible structure. She thought about what was underneath it. About standing at the base of a porch in Virginia in the dark with blood on her temple and one bag in her hand, and the certainty that going back was worse than the terror of not knowing what was ahead. About a maid who kept notes for 11 years and carried them west in her bag because she'd had a feeling they might matter someday. About a woman in Richmond who had spent decades moving carefully through a social world she understood perfectly and had used that understanding finally to dismantle something that had needed dismantling for a very long time. About a man who had answered 4 words to a letter from a stranger and held a door open without asking why she needed to come through it. She thought about all of it, and then she picked up the letter and stood up. Come on, she said to Margaret. Let's go tell Nathan. They walked back to the ranch house together through the November cold, and Clara held the letter in her coat pocket with one hand, her fingers around it, not crushing it, just feeling its edges. This piece of paper that meant something enormous, and also somehow felt strangely small now that it existed. Because the thing it confirmed the freedom, the life, the choice to be here that hadn't been waiting on the ruling. That had been true for months. The ruling was the law catching up with something that had already been decided by the people living it. Nathan was in the barn when they got back. He came out when he heard them, took one look at Clara's face, and went still. "Good news," he said. She pulled out the letter and held it out. He took it. He read it. He read it twice the way he read everything important. Then he looked up. "It's over," she said. He folded the letter carefully and held it for a moment. "How do you feel?" he said. It was such a Nathan question. Not "I told you" or "we won" or any of the things a person might reach for in a moment like this. Just how do you feel? The most important question. She thought about it honestly. "Like myself," she said. "For the first time in a very long time. Exactly like myself." He handed the letter back to her. "Good," he said. And then, because he was Nathan Cole, and this was how he operated. "I was thinking we should expand the herd in spring. I want to talk through the numbers with you." She stared at him. Then she laughed. A real laugh, unchecked, the kind she had started having again these past months, the kind that came from somewhere genuine, not performed. Margaret laughed too, a surprise sound from the doorway, where she had tactfully stopped to give them space. Nathan looked between them with the slightly bewildered expression of a man who had said something straightforwardly practical and gotten a response he hadn't expected. "The timing is wrong," he said. "The timing is perfect," Clara said. She was still smiling, the kind of smile that came from a place that had been shut for a long time and was finally open. "Let's talk numbers." They went inside. Margaret made coffee. Nathan pulled out the ledger. Clara sat down across from him, and they bent over the numbers together, the way they always did. Two people whose partnership had been forged in crisis and had found to both their surprise that it was even stronger in ordinary life. Outside, the wind was picking up over the Colorado Territory. Somewhere in Richmond, Richard Whitmore was living with the consequences of what he had built and what he had destroyed. Somewhere in Denver, Aldridge was filing the final paperwork. Somewhere in a bag in the corner of the room, 11 children's readers were waiting for Tuesday morning. And in a kitchen in Silver Creek, two people were arguing mildly about the cost-effectiveness of adding 6 head versus 8 to the spring herd and the normalcy of it. The beautiful, hard-won, ordinary normalcy of it was the most extraordinary thing either of them had ever experienced. Clara looked up from the ledger at one point and found Nathan watching her with that expression he had, the one she'd been collecting and studying since the beginning. The one that she now understood meant simply that she was someone he was genuinely glad to know. 8, she said. 8's aggressive, he said. I'm an aggressive person, she said. You should have learned that by now. The corner of his mouth moved. I reckon I have, he said. He wrote 8 in the ledger. She bent back over the numbers. And the evening moved on around them, steady and unhurried, like all the evenings that had come before it, and all the evenings that were waiting ahead, ordinary, unremarkable, and exactly precisely what both of them had been looking for before they had words for what they were looking for. What they had been looking for was this: each other, the work, the life, this. 8 head turned out to be exactly right. Clara had known it would be, not from arrogance, but from the same careful calculation she had brought to every decision since arriving in Colorado, the kind of thinking that didn't get credit in the Whitmore household because Richard had needed her not to be good at things. She had run the numbers 4 different ways over 3 evenings before she said the word 8 across the ledger, and every version came back to the same answer. By the following spring, the Cole Ranch had the strongest herd count it had seen in 6 years. Nathan told her that on a morning in April, standing at the fence line, watching the new cattle settle into the field, and he said it the way he said most important things, plainly without ceremony, like a fact that deserved to be stated, and didn't need decoration. "You were right about 8, he said. "I usually am about numbers," she said. He glanced at her sideways. "You could have led with that when we met," he said. "You didn't ask," she said. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was close, and they stood at the fence together in the April morning and watched the cattle move through the field. And it was one of those moments that didn't feel significant while it was happening, but that Clara would remember later with the particular clarity that ordinary happiness sometimes leaves behind. The school had grown. 11 children in October had become 17 by February, as families who had been cautious at first watched and decided the thing was real and worth trusting. Clara had added a second session in the afternoons for the older children 12 and above who needed different material than the primers. She was teaching reading and arithmetic, and on Friday afternoons, what she called thinking, which was her name for the practice of looking at a problem from more than one direction before deciding what you believed about it. The parents of Silver Creek had opinions about this. Most of them were positive. A few were uncertain. One father came to speak to her about it in a tone that suggested he expected her to be apologetic. "My boy came home Friday saying you told them they should question things," the man said. His name was Harlan Decker, and he was the kind of man who wore his certainty the way other men wore hats, always on, rarely examined. "I'm not sure I want my son questioning things." Clara looked at him. "Mr. Decker," she said, "what I told them was that before you decide what you believe, you should look carefully at the evidence. That's not the same as questioning everything. That's the opposite of it. A man who examines his beliefs carefully holds them more firmly than a man who has never tested them." Harlan Decker blinked. "Well," he said, "when you put it that way." "Your son is one of my best students," Clara said. "He thinks very carefully. You should be proud of that." Harlan Decker left mollified and slightly confused, which was the best outcome available. His son, a quiet boy named James, who asked better questions than most adults, Clara knew was back in his seat the following Tuesday, looking at her with the focused attention of someone who understood that what was happening in this room mattered. Clara taught him everything she could. The letter arrived on a Thursday in late May, and it came from a direction no one had expected. It was addressed to Clara in handwriting she did not recognize, postmarked from a town in New Mexico territory she had never heard of. She opened it at the kitchen table after the morning session with Margaret across from her peeling potatoes and Nathan somewhere out on the south field. It was from a woman named Delia Marsh. Delia Marsh had read about the Virginia court ruling in a newspaper. The ruling itself had not been widely covered, but the associated story about the inquiry into Dr. Harlan Morse, which had concluded with his professional certification being revoked, had made several papers, and the details of the Whitmore case had been included as context. Delia Marsh had read every word 3 times. She wrote, "I don't know if you remember, but I was a guest at the Whitmore estate in the spring of 1876. I came with my husband, who was doing business with Mr. Whitmore. I saw things I said nothing about. I told myself it was not my place. I have thought about that choice every day since. I am writing to tell you that I am sorry I said nothing, and I am writing to ask because I have a friend who is in a situation I recognize and I don't know what to do. How did you start? How did you find the courage to leave?" Clara set the letter down. Margaret had stopped peeling and was watching her. "What is it?" Margaret said. Clara told her. Margaret was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to write back?" she said. Clara looked at the letter. She thought about the question, "How did you find the courage to leave?" And she thought about the honest answer, which was complicated and simple at the same time. "I'm going to tell her the truth," Clara said. "That I didn't find courage and then leave. I left first and found something that felt like courage afterward." She paused. "And I'm going to give her every practical piece of information I have, because the practical things matter as much as the emotional ones. A woman needs to know where to go, not just that she can." She picked up her pen. She wrote for 2 hours. She told Delia Marsh about the letter in the newspaper, the train, the 4 words. She told her about Harriet Walsh and Margaret and Aldridge. She told her specifically, and in order, what steps she had taken and what resources had made the difference. She told her that her friend would need someone to go to before she could leave, and that finding that someone was the first practical step, and that every step after that would be hard and would be worth it. She sealed the letter and addressed it and handed it to Nathan to take into town. He looked at the address and then at her face. "Someone who needs help," he said. "Someone whose friend does," she said. "And someone who's been carrying guilt for 2 years." He put the letter in his jacket pocket. "You know this might not be the last one," he said. "Letter like this from a stranger." "I know," she said. "You all right with that?" She thought about it honestly. "More than all right," she said. This is the part Richard never understood. He thought silence protected him. He thought if he kept everyone isolated from each other, no one would ever compare notes. She looked at Nathan steadily. "But women talk. We always have." He just never listened carefully enough to understand that. Nathan held her gaze for a moment. "I'll mail it on my way through," he said, and he went out to saddle the horse. Clara watched him go. She thought about Delia Marsh in New Mexico carrying 2 years of guilt about a morning at a dinner party when she saw something and said nothing. She thought about how that felt. She knew how that felt from the other side of it. The particular weight of a silence you can't take back. She hoped the letter helped. She hoped it reached Delia's friend in time. She went back to preparing the afternoon lesson. Summer came to Silver Creek the way it always did, fast and dry and demanding, the kind of heat that didn't ask permission and expected everyone to simply reorganize their lives around it. The school moved its morning session earlier, starting at sunup and finishing before the worst of the afternoon. Clara taught with the door propped open and a bowl of water on her desk that she could dip a cloth in when a child started looking too flushed. It was during this summer that James Decker Harlan's son, her best student, showed her something unexpected. He had been working on reading outside the school sessions, she knew that. But one morning he came in early before the other children arrived, and he set a piece of paper on her desk. She looked at it. He had written a story. It was short, maybe 2 pages, in a child's careful handwriting, and it was about a man who found a horse that everyone said was too wild to tame. And instead of breaking the horse, the man learned its language. It was not a sophisticated story. The prose was simple, the structure straightforward. But the idea in it was not simple at all. The idea in it was one that a 40-year-old writer would have been proud of. Clara looked up from the paper. James was standing on the other side of the desk with the expression of someone who has done something terrifying and doesn't know yet whether it was worth it. "You wrote this yourself?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." "When?" "Last 3 weeks," he said. "At night, mostly, after my chores." She looked back down at the paper. "James," she said, "this is good." He let out a breath that had clearly been held for a while. "Pa says writing stories isn't practical," he said. "Your father," Clara said carefully, "is a man who values practical things. That's not wrong. But there is nothing impractical about knowing how to put your thinking onto a page clearly enough that another person can understand it. Every contract, every letter, every argument made in a court of law, that's writing." She tapped the paper. "And this is thinking, clear thinking written down. That's as practical as anything I know." James looked at the paper. "Can I keep doing it?" he said. "The stories." "I expect you to," she said. He picked up the paper from her desk and folded it carefully, like it was something worth protecting, and sat down on his bench just as the other children started coming in. Clara stood at the front of the room and watched her student settle James with his folded paper in his pocket, the dark-haired girl who had asked about the stars and was now reading 3 grades above her age. 2 brothers from the Pierce family who competed silently and fiercely over every lesson. A girl named Ruth who had started school unable to hold a pencil and could now write a complete sentence with confidence. She looked at all of them and felt the thing she had felt on the first day, and felt every day, since purpose-rooted and real, the kind that didn't come from being told you were important, but from watching something you built actually work. She opened the morning lesson. The twist that summer was not dramatic. It did not arrive with legal papers, or a hired horse, or a man in an expensive suit. It arrived with a letter from Harriet Walsh, as so many consequential things had, and it took Clara 3 readings to understand the full weight of it. Harriet wrote that Richard Whitmore had remarried. Clara read that sentence and held it. He had married a woman from Baltimore quietly, without announcement 3 months after the Virginia ruling. Harriet had only just learned of it through a mutual acquaintance. The woman's name was Eleanor Voss. She was 24 years old. She had money of her own, an inheritance from her father, which was almost certainly why Richard had chosen her. Harriet wrote, "I have not met her. I don't know what to do with this information. I thought you should know." Clara set the letter down. Nathan was across the table from her, and she handed it to him without a word. She watched his face as he read. Watched the jaw set in that particular way. He set it down. "Eleanor Voss," Clara said. "Yes." "She's 24. "Yes." A silence. "He didn't change," Clara said. It was not a question. She had not expected him to change. She had never had any illusion about the capacity of men like Richard to reflect honestly on themselves. But there was a difference between knowing something and having it confirmed, and the confirmation sat in her stomach like a cold weight. "Clara," Nathan said. "I know," she said. "I know I can't." "What do you want to do?" he said. She looked at the letter. She thought about Eleanor Voss, 24 years old, recently married to a man who had just lost a very public legal fight and a significant portion of his professional standing. She thought about what that man would bring home to a new wife. The anger, the need to reclaim control somewhere he could find it. The slow, patient work of dismantling a person from the inside until she believed she deserved it. She thought about herself at 22, standing in a church in Virginia with 200 guests around her, saying vows to a man she had not looked at carefully enough. "Write to Harriet," Clara said. "Tell her we need to find a way to reach Eleanor Voss. Not threaten her, not alarm her, reach her. A letter maybe? Something that says—" She stopped thinking. "Something that says there are women who know Richard Whitmore's history and are willing to talk about it if she ever wants to listen." Nathan looked at her. "That's risky," he said. "If Richard finds out, he's going to keep doing this," Clara said. "To her and to whoever comes after her." The ruling didn't stop him. The public attention didn't stop him. The only thing that might slow him down is if the women around him know enough to protect themselves. She met Nathan's eyes. "I can't reach every woman he will ever hurt. But I can reach this one. I can at least try." A long silence. "Write to Harriet," Nathan said finally. "Be careful how you word it." She was already reaching for her pen. She wrote 3 drafts before she found the right language. Not alarming, not presumptuous. Simply a woman reaching out to another woman to say, "I know the man you married. I know things that might matter to you. If you ever want to talk, I am here." She sent it to Harriet with instructions to deliver it through a channel that would not be traced back to the coal ranch in Colorado. She did not know if it would reach Eleanor Voss. She did not know if Eleanor Voss would read it or believe it or do anything with it. But she had done what she could, and that was the only standard she held herself to anymore. Not perfection, not certainty of outcome, only the honest effort made with the resources available. She sent the letter and went back to preparing the next week's school lessons. In September, 3 things happened that Clara would remember as the shape of that season. The first was that Margaret got sick. Not gravely, not with anything that threatened her life, but a chest illness that kept her in bed for 10 days and frightened Clara more than she had expected, because in the year and a half since Margaret had arrived in Silver Creek, she had become something Clara could not have predicted when she was just the kitchen maid at the Whitmore estate who left newspapers in convenient places. She had become family. Not the complicated, obligatory kind, the chosen kind, which is the only kind that really holds. Clara nursed her through it without complaint, reorganizing her school schedule to allow for it, and on the 7th day when Margaret's color was finally starting to come back, and she was sitting up and demanding tea, and clearly on the mend, she looked at Clara and said, "You're hovering." "I'm not hovering," Clara said. "I'm sitting in a chair." "You've been in that chair for 3 hours." "I find the chair comfortable." Margaret looked at her with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to say the thing she was actually thinking. "You were frightened," Margaret said. "Yes," Clara said, because she had learned that the honest answer took less energy than the deflecting one. "I was." "I'm not going anywhere," Margaret said. "I know that now," Clara said. "I was less certain 6 days ago." Margaret reached out and put her hand over Clara's the way she had a habit of doing when words weren't sufficient, and they sat there together in the quiet of the bedroom for a moment. The two of them, the woman who had carried notes for 11 years, and the woman who had finally given her a reason to use them. The second thing that happened in September was that Eleanor Voss wrote back. The letter came through Harriet and was short, 2 paragraphs formal, careful. Eleanor said she had received Clara's message. She said she was not in a position to discuss the matter at present. She said she appreciated being contacted. It was not much. But Clara read those 2 paragraphs 4 times and heard what was underneath the formality, the sound of a woman who was already paying attention, who had already noticed things, who was not yet ready to name them, but was at least looking directly at them. She wrote back a single line. "Whenever you are ready, I am here. You are not alone." She sent it through Harriet and waited. The third thing that happened in September was the one she had not seen coming. A woman came to Silver Creek on the eastbound stage and asked at the general store how to find the Cole Ranch. She was tall, well-dressed in a way that suggested money somewhere in her recent past, and she was traveling alone, which in 1879 was still unusual enough to be noticed. The store owner's wife told Clara about it within an hour, which was how Silver Creek operated. Clara was at the school when Nathan came to tell her. "Woman asking for directions to the ranch," he said. "Doesn't know anyone in town. Nobody knows her." Clara looked at him. She felt something, not fear, not exactly, but the heightened attention of a person who has learned to pay attention when something does not fit the pattern. "What does she look like?" she said. Nathan described her. Clara thought about it. "I don't know her," she said. "But she came here on purpose." She untied her apron and handed it to Nathan. "I'll go." She walked back to the ranch and found the woman waiting outside the front fence, not at the door, which Clara noticed she had not presumed to come to the door. She was standing at the fence with a small traveling bag at her feet, and when she saw Clara coming, she straightened and clasped her hands in front of her and said, "Mrs. Cole." "Yes," Clara said. She looked at the woman carefully. 40 maybe. Steady eyes, but something behind them that Clara recognized the way you recognize a country you've lived in. "My name is Catherine Fales," the woman said. "I was a friend of Harriet Walsh suggested I come." She paused. "I am in a situation that Harriet said you might understand." Clara opened the gate. "Come inside," she said. "I'll put on coffee." Catherine Fales sat at the kitchen table, that kitchen table which had hosted so many things, and she told Clara her story. It was not Richard Whitmore's name in it. It was a different name. A man in Philadelphia, a different city, and the same pattern. The slow patient erosion, the isolation, the physician's reports that explained away what the body clearly showed. Clara listened all the way through without interrupting. Then she said, "Do you have somewhere to go if you leave?" Catherine shook her head. "You do now," Clara said. She set the coffee down and she sat across from this stranger, who was not a stranger in any way that mattered, and she began for the second time in her life to help someone build a plan from a kitchen table in Colorado. Nathan came in an hour later, assessed the situation in the span of about 4 seconds, and said, "The spare room's made up if you need to stay while you sort things out." Catherine Fales looked at him as if she was not sure she had heard correctly. "You don't know me," she said. "No," Nathan said. "But I know this." He gestured a small gesture that somehow encompassed the table, the coffee cups, the conversation that had been happening. "This is what we do here." Clara looked at him across the table. She thought about a train platform, a man taking her bag without making a production of it. 4 words that had been enough. This is what we do here. Yes, she thought. It is. Catherine stayed for 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, Clara helped her write letters, organize her resources, and locate a lawyer in Kansas City who came recommended by Aldridge. Margaret took to her immediately in the way Margaret took to most people who arrived at the ranch, carrying something heavy with tea and practicality, and the unspoken message that she had seen worse and things could be managed. When Catherine left on the westbound stage toward Kansas City, she stood on the Silver Creek platform with her bag and a letter of introduction for the Kansas City lawyer, and she took Clara's hand in both of hers. "I didn't know this existed," she said. "A place like this. People like this." "I didn't either," Clara said. "Until I needed it badly enough to get on a train and find out." Catherine nodded. Her eyes were bright. "Thank you," she said. "Right when you're settled," Clara said. She did. A month later, a letter came from Kansas City, brief and practical, and ending with, "I am all right. I am more than all right. I think I am going to be fine." Clara put that letter in the drawer with the others, with Nathan's original advertisement from the Denver newspaper, and Harriet's first letter, and the Virginia court ruling, and Delia Marsh's letter from New Mexico, and every piece of paper that told some part of the story of how she had gotten from there to here. The drawer was getting full. She thought she might need a box soon. She mentioned this to Nathan one evening. He looked at the drawer. "Good kind of problem to have," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." She closed the drawer. The year turned. The school grew to 22 students by winter. James Decker wrote 4 more stories, and Clara sent the best 2 to a teacher's publication in Denver that was soliciting examples of frontier education, and they were published. And James Decker read his own name in print for the first time in his life, and went quiet in a way that meant something large was happening inside him. Clara told him what it meant. She told him clearly in language he could hold on to. "This is not the last time your name will be in print," she said. "This is the first time. Remember the difference." He looked at the page. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Eleanor Voss wrote again in January. This letter was longer than the first, less formal, and asked 3 specific questions about legal options in Maryland. Clara answered every question and sent the letter back through Harriet the same day it arrived. She did not know what Eleanor would do with the information. She knew what she herself had done with similar information once in the dark of a Virginia night with blood on her temple and 1 bag in her hand. The rest was Eleanor's to decide. Nathan found Clara at the school one evening in February after the children had gone, and she was straightening the room the way she always did at the end of the day. He stood in the doorway, the same way he had stood in it the first time he came, taking in the space. The benches, the books, the chalkboard with the day's lesson still half erased. He said, "Margaret's making something that smells good." "It's her Thursday stew," Clara said. "She makes it every 3rd Thursday. Does she know it's Thursday?" "She has a very reliable internal calendar," Clara said. He came into the room and stood near the desk while she finished straightening, and then he said in the way he had of saying important things directly, "I've been thinking." She looked up. "About what?" "About the fact that in 2 years this," he gestured at the schoolroom, "has gone from an idea you mentioned on the back porch to 22 children who know how to read, and a boy whose name is in a Denver publication." He paused. "And about the fact that I didn't do any of that. You did that." She looked at him. "You built the walls," she said. "One Saturday," he said, "with 6 other men." "You believed I could do it before I fully believed it myself," she said. "That counts." He was quiet for a moment. "Clara," he said, "I want to say something, and I want to say it right. So I'm going to take a minute." She waited. She knew how to wait for him to find the words he needed. She had learned that the words were worth the wait. "I put that advertisement in the paper," he said slowly, "because I was lonely in a way I hadn't admitted to myself yet, and I thought a practical arrangement made sense. A partner. Someone to share the work." He looked at her steadily. "I did not expect you. I did not expect any of this. I did not expect to watch someone rebuild themselves from the ground up and find out in the process that the person they were rebuilding was remarkable." He paused. "I don't say that kind of word often." "I know you don't," she said softly. "I want you to know that I see it," he said. "All of it. Not just the school or the legal fight or any single piece. The whole thing. The whole you." He stopped. "I'm not sure that came out the way I meant it." "It came out exactly right," she said. She crossed the room to where he was standing. She put her hand against his chest, and he put his hand over hers, and they stood there in the schoolroom in the February evening, in the room they had built, in the life they had built in the town that had taken them both in, and made room for what they were becoming. "Nathan," she said. The advertisement said you were looking for honesty and companionship." "It did." "Did you find it?" He looked at her for a long moment, with that careful, steady regard that she had been collecting since a train platform in Silver Creek, and would spend the rest of her life grateful for. "Found considerably more than I advertised for," he said. She laughed, and he smiled, a real one, not the corner of the mouth movement, but an actual smile which she had learned to treat as the rare and valuable thing it was. They walked back to the ranch house together through the February cold, close enough that their shoulders touched, unhurried, the way people move when they are exactly where they mean to be. Margaret had the stew on the table. She looked up when they came in, assessed them the way she always did, and said, "Wash your hands. It's hot." They washed their hands. They sat down. Margaret served the stew and poured the coffee and sat down across from them both. And the three of them ate together in the warm kitchen, with the cold Colorado night pressing against the windows, and the stove throwing heat into the room, and it was ordinary, and it was everything. Clara looked at the faces across from her. Margaret, who had carried notes for 11 years and crossed half a country to tell the truth. Nathan, who had held a door open for a stranger and had no idea what was going to walk through it. She thought about the woman who had run from a Virginia mansion in the dark, bleeding and terrified, with nothing but a bag and a letter, and the absolute desperate knowledge that anything was better than staying. That woman had not known about this kitchen, had not known about this table, these people, this life, had not known about 22 children learning to read, or James Decker's name in print, or Eleanor Voss asking careful questions in January, or Catherine Fales saying, "I think I am going to be fine." That woman had only known she had to move, and moving one step at a time in the direction of her own survival, she had built something she could not have imagined from the dark road outside a Virginia mansion. She had built a life that was entirely, irrevocably hers. Not given to her. Not rescued into existence. Built by her own hands, in her own name, on her own terms. That was the truth Richard Whitmore had never understood and could never take from her, that the woman he had tried to make small had simply stubbornly kept growing, and everything he had done to stop her had only made her grow faster toward the light, toward this kitchen, toward these people, toward the person she had always been underneath everything he had buried her in. Clara Bennett had escaped a mansion. But it was Clara Cole who built a home, and she was never not for a single day going back.